Hello everybody, welcome back to Painting Fundamentals. In this lesson we're going to talk about brushes. Particularly we need to talk about how to clean them, how to take care of them, and how to prep them for painting. If you remember our demo wall over here, we've done a lot of our painting process so far between priming, caulking, and spackling and sanding on this wall. We need to get to where we're going to be using brushes and rollers on it. Our next step is actually using the brushes, but before we do that, let me say that a brush is a tool that if you don't understand how to care for it, you have no business using it. It's not complicated, but it's really, really important. Brushes are not cheap, at least good brushes aren't. And given that they are good quality tools, we have to give them the care that they deserve. So we've talked about everything about a brush, all of its pieces and parts, materials, and engineering in it, but we haven't talked about how to use it. The first thing you need to do before you can use this brush is prime it. And by priming it, I mean you need to make it ready to accept paint. A dry brush does not take paint very well. You can prime a brush with paint, it just takes a long time. This also applies to roller covers, we'll get to that later. So if I have a brush, I just want to do a simple process of wetting it. Water in the bristles makes it accept or soak up and hold paint much better. So priming this brush is as easy as taking a bucket. I have fresh water in this bucket, and I'm just going to wet the brush down. It's going to be full of water now, and I need to remove a lot of this water. And we're going to get into cleaning the brush, which is very similar to this process. But once we've wet it, that's too much water. We only need it damp. So I'm just going to spin this brush with my hands or a special tool we'll call a spinner. And then it's going to be just damp enough that I can then use it. It's at this moment ready to soak up. We can load this paint into this brush and it'll transfer it to the surface much quicker. This is a lot easier than, as I mentioned before, trying to prime this brush with paint alone. Now that we've primed our brush, it's time to load it with paint. Remember, this process of using a brush is going to be pulling the paint out of a container and then transferring as much of that paint as possible to the surface. And we want to do this multiple times. It's a very productive process. We need to be efficient about it. We're going to have a paint cup. I've got a couple versions of paint cups here. I've got a larger one and a smaller one. Both of these are equipped with a cool feature that is a magnet. And this magnet is going to stick, or the brush is going to stick to this cup when we're not using it. That keeps the brush from falling in the paint too deeply, and I'll talk about that in a second. Either one is equipped with the same feature. So if we're not holding the brush, it's a great place to store it where it won't create any mess or problems for us. So first of all, we've got the paint cups. We need to fill them with enough paint that we can use that paint properly with the brush. Now we need to load the brush. For demonstrating this, I'm going to use the largest brush that I have. This is a 4-inch wall brush. It'll be great for showing the camera and for you to get a good idea about loading this brush. We want to only load the last half of the brush head. Any paint that ends up in the higher part of this brush head, number one, we can't control it. Number two, it makes a mess. And number three, it gets forced into the ferrule. It's going to expand this brush head. It's going to change the shape of it. And the control of this brush has everything to do with this brush shape or the brush head shape. So remember, we're trying to keep all of our paint on this end of the brush. If you get too much paint on it, you can always stop what you're doing, wash that brush out, and then it's ready, primed, and you can start over again. I tend to wash my brushes every couple of hours. Paint tends to migrate up into the brush head as you work, so it's always a good idea to keep that control. So I've got my paint cup here, and I've got my brush. I've got my paint in my cup. I don't have any paint in here right now, but I want enough paint in there that I can dip half of the brush head. I don't need a full paint cup. It's too much paint and it's just an accident waiting to happen. So I will dip this brush into my paint, and I'm going to slap it on the sides of the paint cup, and that's going to force the paint into this brush head. You're pushing as much paint as you can into the brush, and as you tap it on the sides, it's going to free up any loose paint. So when I pull this brush out of the cup, it's going to be as much paint as that brush can hold, but it's going to be under control. I'm also lifting it and kind of giving it a little bit of a twist. Now I'm ready to transfer to my surface to then unload that paint onto the wall, trim, whatever I'm working on. I've got a video of this happening. Let's go ahead and take a look at that clip. So we're loading the brush. Only the last half of the bristles need paint on them. We're going to tap it on the sides. It's now loaded, ready to go. Let's see what that looks like if we don't do it well. As you can see here, I've over-dipped the brush. I've tapped it, but look at all that paint that's coming off of it. I've got no control over this paint. Let's scrape this off and try it one more time. Dipping the brush, only the last half of the bristles. I'll tap it on the side. That's going to drive the paint deep into the brush head. I've got no drips. Now we can unload this paint onto a surface. I think that video shows it pretty well, loading that brush. One thing to mention though is we're going to be doing this process over and over again. I slowed it down for the camera. It likes to see things in slower motion. In real life, you're going to be moving faster, but what you don't want to do is to move so fast that you're flinging paint everywhere while you're doing it. So remember, this concept of loading the brush has to be under control. So now that we've talked about priming the brush, we've talked about loading the brush, the next step obviously is going to be using this brush to transfer this paint to a surface. We have a whole video coming up next on all the techniques and specific details about the procedure of doing that. I want to jump ahead to where we're going to be cleaning this brush up, and we're getting to the end of the job. We need to make this brush ready to use again. So the cleaning process becomes very important. Let's get into that. I've got my brush, it's ready to be cleaned. This brush has paint on it. It doesn't really, but imagine that it does. I'm going to remove a majority of it on a surface. You don't want to start cleaning a brush that's fully loaded with paint. So remove as much as you can before the washing process. I like to use a couple of buckets, phase 1 bucket, phase 2 buckets for washing. You can use a utility sink. You need a source of water, and that water has to be fairly clean. Let's go ahead and look at a video of this process. Time to clean our brush. Let's make our job easier. Get rid of all the extra paint in the brush, whether that's on a surface that we're working on. We can scrape it off in the paint cup. If you have some newspaper or scrap rosin paper laying around, you can wipe any extra paint off. At this moment, that's going to make our life a lot easier when it comes time to have to flush this brush out and completely get the bristles clean. Now it's time for the bucket. Fresh water, not a full bucket. We can keep this under control. Remember, it's a messy process. It's a simple process though. We're just working our fingers through the brush head. We're getting all the paint out, even on the inside of that brush head, and we're looking for this to become cleaner. As you see higher up in this brush head, the bristles have paint on it that have started to dry. That's going to be one of the hardest parts, is working through that semi-dry paint that's higher up in the brush head. You might need a special tool called a brush comb. This will work through that, sort of those rough areas higher up in the brush head. You can run this through and it will help a lot to clean out that brush head. I really can't stress enough how important it is to be really thorough about this job. Now we're finished. We've got a nice clean flushed out brush, but it's full of water. We need to get the water out. Let's put it in our brush spinner. It'll hold it nice and tight. We can spin it. This is another reason why we don't want this bucket too full. There's a lot of water coming out of this. In slow motion, you can see all that water flying out away from that brush head. So if we didn't have this bucket here, if you were trying to do this somewhere inside, you could make a huge mess with this. Let's talk about this brush spinner. A simple tool that painters can use to remove that water from a brush or even a roller cover at the end of the washing process. It has a simple handle on it, and as you push the handle, it's going to spin the end. This end is made to hold that roller cover or hold the brush handle. It grips really tight. It might even be a little hard to get your brush in here in the beginning, but the brush is not going to fly away if it fits into here. And once you spin this a few times, you've removed 90% of the water in that brush, which is a great ending to that washing process. A brush spinner is a great tool to have as a painter. to remove all of that extra water. But if you don't have one, no problem. You can do this by hand. If I have a brush and it's got water in it, I can remove that extra water just by spinning it by hand. This is enough speed to remove most of that water from the brush. And I'm back down to my damp brush. Now it's ready to be stored. We have one more step, and that is putting this into its sheath. This is the cardboard box that these come in. You should save this for as long as possible. The brush is going to last for a good long time if you take care of it. This is made of cardboard, so as you use it, it's going to deteriorate. But this is made to hold exactly this brush, this specific brush. It fits in here like this, and then we're going to close it up. There's a Velcro clasp on it, and if we close it up like this, it will hold this brush in exactly the shape that it was made in. This is very important. Don't take your brushes and just throw them in your toolkit, because a brush that lands in between a screwdriver or something is going to ruin the entire brush head. Remember, the shape of that brush head is as important as any other feature of this tool. So let's assume that maybe you've lost your cover or it is deteriorated to the point that you can no longer use it. You can always make one out of a heavy paper or some kind of cardboard. It's not a difficult process, but just make sure that before you store it, you put it in some kind of protective case or sheath.
This video was made possible through the financial support from Benjamin Moore.
This video is a production of Trade Skills U, all rights reserved. If you provide instruction in the construction trades and have a need for videos like these, please contact us at tradeskillsu.com.